Link to the Past. Known as Triforce of the Gods in Japan, back in those days Nintendo of America was very much against having religious references in their games. For many, this game is considered to be the Zelda game. That if there's any Zelda game that you absolutely need to play, it's A Link to the Past. My personal history of A Link to the Past? I didn't actually play this game until it was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2003. I didn't own a Super Nintendo until around then, and I did pick up the SNES version. The two versions are virtually identical for the most part, but this isn't a comparison between them. I'm sticking to the original SNES version, recorded off of vintage Super Nintendo. So what can I say about Link to the Past? As the third Zelda game, what was there to do? Well, for starters, this game is where Zelda's mythology takes off. Legend tells us of the Golden Land, where the three goddesses left behind three golden triangles that became the Triforce. If someone with a good heart were to touch the Triforce, then there would be peace for all. But if someone with an evil heart were to touch the Triforce, the world would fall into darkness. One day that occurred. A thief by the name of Ganon entered the sacred realm and slew his followers. He touched the Triforce with blood-stained hands, and his wish to conquer the world echoed throughout time and space. The Golden Land became the Dark World, and Ganon's power roared through the realms. Ganon's monsters invaded Hyrule. So the king of Hyrule ordered the 7 wise men, or sages as they would come to be known, to seal the sacred realm. Knights of Hyrule fought to defend them. Though most of them perished, they succeeded in casting their spell, and Ganon was sealed away, and that seal should have remained for all time. But one day, many years later, great catastrophes occurred throughout the land of Hyrule, but a wizard named Ganon put an end to it. The king would place Ganon as chief advisor for the throne, but yet all was not well. The wizard proved to be a force for evil. He slew the king and began kidnapping 7 maidens who were descendants of the sages by trapping them in the Dark World. Ganon would break the seal protecting the Light World. Only one remained, Princess Zelda. Zelda would send out a telepathic message to a boy named Link asking that he rescue her from the dungeon. Link awakened to find his uncle leaving with a sword and shield in hand, but Link knew the message was for him. He arrived at the castle and found his uncle mortally wounded. He passed down his sword and shield to him, and Link was able to rescue Zelda and take her to safety at the sanctuary. Link seeks out the sage Sahasrara, who tells Link that in order to best Ganon, he must acquire the 3 pendants and claim the Master Sword, the only weapon that can destroy the evil wizard. And thus our adventure begins. As I said, this is where the Legend of Zelda's mythology takes off. It's a prequel to the 2 NES games, and it details the story of Link and Zelda's predecessors. So this is the first Zelda game to establish that it's generally a different Link and Zelda with every game. This is where Legacy comes into play. With additions like the Sacred Realm, the 7 Sages, the Triforce granting a wish, Zelda lore is so interesting. It's a shame the timeline is so screwy. I mean, where does Breath of the Wild take place again? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about Link. Link is much more versatile than he was in the previous 2 games. Whereas before he could only stab his sword, he now swings his sword like an actual sword. This allows Link to cover much more ground when getting into combat situations. Once you beat the first dungeon, Sahasrara gives Link the Pegasus Boots, which allows Link to dash, and this is a very useful ability for getting around areas as fast as you possibly can. There's also the items he can get. This is where you get items in every dungeon that add to Link's moveset. I love these items, but I'll get more into them later. As for Hyrule, it's big. Much bigger than the previous 2 games. As the map will tell you. I love this map. It pretty much tells you where you need to go, and it's to the point. That's how I like it. The world of Hyrule is so different. Different towns, different locations. In fact, going to Kakariko Town, you find townspeople who will actually rat Link out to the soldiers if you talk to them. Of course, beating the soldiers is pretty easy, but I like the little touch. Link can also get access to fairies by collecting empty bottles. Link can store anything of value inside. With a fairy inside, if you die, the fairy will bring Link back to life. So that if I found myself running low on hearts, the fairy would save me. I like that. It's nice to have that reassurance. There's so much to do in Hyrule. You can find various goodies such as pieces of heart to increase your health. This time you need to get 4 pieces to be able to increase your life. Or exploring the world of Hyrule to play a game or just getting lost is a lot of fun. It just feels so much more alive than it did before. It's that sense of adventure and wonderment that you find in Zelda that makes it so special. For example, in the original Zelda, there was no way to identify which spots could be bombed, whereas in A Link to the Past, areas that can be bombed are easily identifiable, so the only things stopping you from exploring what routes you can take are if you don't have enough bombs. Now let's talk about the first few dungeons. They're honestly pretty easy. What stands out to me are the bosses. They're much more imposing. I mean, let's compare the first boss of Zelda 1 to Zelda 3. Yeah, I'm not feeling the intimidation, but here? Wow, that's just amazing. Not to say it's particularly hard, it's not. It's really easy with your bow and arrows. The second fight is also really easy, but it feels more like an actual battle. So now comes time for the third dungeon. Gotta go up Death Mountain again and escort this old man to his house, but he gives you a magic mirror that comes in handy when Link teleports to the Dark World. This is meant to give you a small tease of what's to come. Anyway, third dungeon is easy, even the boss isn't that hard. Now it's time to go to the Lost Woods and get the Master Sword. Finding the sacred blade resting in its spot, text reads, "The hero's triumph on Cataclysm's eve. Wins 3 symbols of virtue. The Master Sword he will then retrieve, keeping the Knight's line true." Hell yeah! Now that is how you make a weapon iconic. But the sense of joy doesn't last long as Zelda contacts Link and tells him that the soldiers have found her and are storming the sanctuary. Ain't that just typical? You arrive, but it's too late. The soldiers have taken Zelda and the sage dies. Or disappears. That's like the family-friendly way of saying, yeah, he's dead. So anyway, Link returns to Hyrule Castle, and with the Master Sword, cutting through these guys is way easier. Is Link killing these guys, or are they just being defeated? Link arrives, but it's too late. A Ganon teleports Zelda to the Dark World. Although Link just stands there. I mean, you could have, tried to stop it, but okay. So a Ganon is pretty easy. You just play tennis with him. Of course, he pulls out one last trick and teleports Link to the Dark World with him, and now, the game truly begins. The Dark World is this very, well, dark, desolate place. I love the contrast between the two worlds. Switching between them is easy enough with the magic mirror, but you can only use it to return to the light world from the dark world. You can only warp to the dark world through these warp tiles, which are easy enough to find. Switching between the two worlds is the defining gameplay mechanic. It's also essential that you get the flute, which allows Link to warp in the light world, but it comes with a sad story. The boy is trapped in the dark world and asks Link to find the flute for him. You do, and he only requests that you play the flute one last time for him. And you do so, and he turns into a tree. Sad. But for added punch, you can find his father and tell him what happened. Things like this can really elevate a game. Now, I'll talk about the items Link gets. I love these items. I love the bow and arrow. I love the Bombos medallion because it just destroys all enemies on screen. Boom! Blow it all up! I love getting the magic meter half reduction. Lets you spam so much. I love getting the damage reduction. I love getting the Master Sword tempered, which makes it stronger. I love getting the huge shield that Link can't even see from, right? Never mind. But my favorite has got to be the hookshot. Just going from place to place using the hookshot to traverse, it opens up so much overworld and dungeon design. I love this item. Now for the dungeons of the Dark World. Link's objective is now to rescue the 7 maidens from the crystals they are imprisoned in. The dungeons are pretty straightforward. I didn't always use a guide to figure out where I needed to go, but what stands out to me is the first boss, the Helmasaur King. You have to use the hammer to break its shell, and then you can attack it with your sword. I like the idea of using previously acquired items to your advantage to weaken enemies, as it makes Link much more versatile in combat. After beating him, you rescue the first maiden. She tells Link of how the Dark World used to be the Golden Land, and how Ganon is building up his power, which is fine. Do you understand? What am I supposed to say? No? Do you take me for a fool? Whatever. Getting access to the Swamp Palace requires draining the lake in the Light World, and then returning to the Dark World to find it now accessible, because the water is now flooded, as Sahasrara tells you. Yeah, I kinda figured that on my own. Thank you! Anyway, beat the boss with the hookshot, and we get more exposition of how Ganon was once a man named Gandor. Before anyone asks, no, the name Gandorf Dragmire is never mentioned in-game. Anyway, time for the third dungeon. The Skull Woods. This dungeon is confusing, since you have to constantly exit and re-enter it from the outside. It's here that you need to start taking a little bit more care of your magic, because I ran out of magic against the boss using the fire rod. Now, you can use your sword to damage it, but the fire rod is much more efficient, so make sure you keep some potions on you to refill your magic. The next dungeon is the Thieves' Hideout in the Dark World's equivalent of Kakariko Town. There's actually some foreshadowing of this guy early on in the game, and I like that. It actually makes you think you've already rescued the maiden by having a girl accompany you. But when you take her into the light... jeez, that's horrifying. This is a pretty hectic battle too. You gotta be fast. Anyway, you beat him and the maiden tells Link that he is the last of the Knights of Hyrule's bloodline. So this is the first game to imply that Link is special. Anyway, time to go to the Ice Palace, which contains slippery physics since it's all ice. I love using the Bombos medallion on the boss. Boom! Blow it up! So with that, another boss down and another maiden saved. Time to get to Misery Mire. Just a sense of foreboding with the rain crashing down. The Mire is one of the more confusing dungeons with its layout, and the boss is not much to write about, doesn't require much strategy. But with that done, only one maiden left to go, Zelda herself. So it's back to the Dark World equivalent of Death Mountain as we go to Turtle Rock. But first we need to pick something up. You have to blow up this wall with a huge bomb. Here you can upgrade your sword to the golden sword and your arrows to the silver arrow, which you absolutely need to destroy Ganon. The game doesn't really tell you this right away. It's this whole thing again. Fortunately, finding that out is not very hard, and the location is pretty close to where the final battle is, so it's not like you'd be going out of your way to do it. Turtle Rock is a largely confusing dungeon, and having used this cane to create platforms, so you better watch your magic meter. It's a long dungeon too. It takes forever. The boss, the Trinex, requires both the Ice Rod and Fire Rod to do damage to, so make sure you don't waste that magic meter, otherwise it's back outside, grab a magic potion to make sure you don't run out of magic against the boss. But after that, you finally rescue Zelda, and it's time to take the fight to Ganon himself. The maidens break the seal on Ganon's tower, and it's time to go inside. There's an ominous feeling of dread as you see statues of Ganon all over the place. This dungeon causes you to use all of your skills to your advantage. You even have to fight all three of the original bosses again, but because your sword is stronger, you've gained more health and you have better defense, they are incredibly easy and go down like nothing. And finally, that leaves the confrontation with a Ganon, and he tries to split into three, but he's no less difficult than before. After you beat him, Ganon emerges and flies off, but Link gives chase. Even though that bird can only teleport Link in the light world, but okay. Now it's time to start the final battle. But the game gives you plenty of leeway, so if you're not ready, you can refill your bottles, get any heart pieces you might have missed. I like that sense of, okay, take your time, kid, I'll be waiting for you. But now it's time to fight Ganon. He says that he never thought a boy like you could give him so much trouble, and refers to a Ganon as his alter ego. Now, that's interesting. I mean, so Ganon was always a Ganon. Was he trying to break the seal on himself? Was a Ganon possessed by him, or was Ganon using a body? It's a little confusing. So now it's time for the final battle. Much better than the original game, as Ganon attacks you with his trident, and you have to hit him with your sword while he's attacking. But then he goes into his second phase where he breaks the floor, and if you fall here, which is very easy to do, you have to start the whole battle all over again. Now that is annoying. Making it more annoying is that the lights go out, and you have to relight them, then hit him with your sword, and hit him with a silver arrow enough times, and only that way can you finally win. But now Link finds himself before the Triforce. The Triforce needs a new master, so it asks Link to touch it with a wish in his heart. Everything is made better. Everybody who died is brought back to life. It's a nice little happy ending. The Master Sword sleeps again. Forever. Until about 20 years later, but hey, who can predict the future? So that's A Link to the Past. I dare say this might be my favorite Zelda game of all time. It takes what worked from Zelda 1 and 2 and redefines it. I love this game for the improvements, the music, the gameplay, the story, the mechanics. It just perfects the Zelda formula. And for that, if there's any Zelda game you should play, play A Link to the Past. It's worth it.